Hey everybody, I'm Ben Yee.
Hey, I'm Elissa Stein, and today we're here talking about something that's really topical and in the moment, which is about endorsements.
Yes, political endorsements, my
Political
goodness.
endorsements, a few questions I want to throw out to start with.
All right.
What are political endorsements?
Yeah.
Who makes political endorsements? Why are they important?
Yes.
And also, I wanted to put out there that right now, for 2018, there are both state and national elections going on.
Right.
They're on different timetables, just to make things more complicated for us poor constituents. So there are two different timetables for primary voting.
Yeah.
There are two different timetables for
In New York
petition
State,
getting,
at least,
in
yes.
New York State. Well, you know,
And some other states.
We are local.
Yes.
So things are happening on two different time frames.
Yes.
Just to confuse the issue a little bit, but I know as a Village Independent Democratic Executive Committee member, we've already started endorsing people.
Yes.
We did very quickly at our last meeting in February. We have another one coming up in March, which you're going to talk more about. But let's break this down to people, because to me, I didn't know what this meant. Why is it important? Why do people come to meetings and seek them? And what does it benefit the politician? And what should people thinking about endorsing be looking for?
Right. Excellent question. Let's deal with each one of these
They're
questions.
Right.
Yes. This is the
multi-part.
Short questions.
Short answers. So
short answers. Okay, here we
first,
go.
what is an endorsement?
Okay, what is an endorsement? An endorsement is a statement of support for a particular candidate. Who makes them?
I was going to say that. Who makes them?
Lots of different people and organizations will make them. The most common ones that we'll hear about are endorsements by other elected officials who are trying to support colleagues of theirs or their candidates with whom they think they'll work the best, or if you're in a machine sort of situation, who will be the most subservient to their will as an established elected
that's another
power.
whole show.
We won't get into it right now. Other well, aside from the electeds who make endorsements, there's organizations who make endorsements. So these might be super PACs. They might
teachers union. You always hear about unions
absolutely.
making endorsements for things.
And this goes all the way down to local political clubs.
Right.
I mean, technically, a statement of support can come from anybody. So
I could come out and say,
that's
"Hey, Elissa Stein supports X for governor."
That's exactly right.
Will it make any difference to them? Probably not. But
you're not a big enough entity with a large enough following that a campaign might tout it. But nowadays, with the internet, grassroots campaigns will have oftentimes a section of their website where you can sign up to be a citizen endorser or somebody,
we could
and
be
they'll list
endorsers.
all the folks who endorse them.
Real Politics, the TV show, could endorse candidates.
Dicey, because let's get into the next part of that. How do they decide who to endorse, and what do endorsements mean?
Right, and I was a part of this conversation, and it was interesting.
Right, for the Village Independent Democrats, which is a local Democratic club here in New York City.
Right, and so we had candidates come in who were running for different things, and they got up and made statements, and then we discussed pros, cons, do we want to go with a new person or an incumbent? And in this new political environment where there are many new people participating, things were thrown down were sort of the old guard and the new guard with very different opinions about which way things should go.
Right.
So that seems to be that's not just this microcosm, but I think it could be happening in bigger circles.
It's definitely happening right now because of the way the political climate has evolved since 2017, or since Donald Trump was elected, essentially. This conversation is happening all over the country in all sorts of organizations and clubs and groups, old and new. So I want to talk about two different things. First, why are endorsements important and what they give a candidate? And second, how people conceive of endorsements and how they make their decisions, especially those folks who have been involved for a long time, who we might consider the establishment. What is their rationale for making endorsements that often seem out of step with others?
Right. Especially when it comes to sticking by an incumbent.
Yes, so let's dive into it.
Yeah.
First, what do endorsements get you? Well, as we mentioned just a moment ago, an endorsement from you as an individual might not mean that much. And the reason is that you don't represent a lot of votes or a lot of resources. The most valuable endorsements come from organizations like Democratic Party clubs or super PACs or other electeds, because they have influence over other voters. And the things that politicians want, or candidates really want when they're seeking an endorsement, are one of three different things: money, And so a super PAC endorsement is very valuable because that comes with money, and with their money comes legitimacy in the eyes of other donors. Money follows money because it doesn't, if you're a donor, you don't necessarily want to be throwing your cash against the resources of other large organizations.
Makes sense. 2,
volunteers, particularly for petitioning. This is where Democratic clubs come in particular. Democratic clubs are oftentimes, or Democratic county or local organizations, are oftentimes the most involved people in a locality, which means they come with primary voters, and they come with people who are willing to do petitioning and knowledgeable about that process. And
so that's where it comes from. So when you see in this season people standing out on the street asking you for signatures, that's petitioning.
Right, and we'll come back to that in just a moment. The third thing which politicians seek from endorsements is ideological alignment. So if you have an organization like the NRA, for example,
very timely.
Very timely. Members of the NRA are rabidly in favor of the idea that individuals should have the right to own whatever firearm they please and carry it around at will in open society. And so the NRA's endorsement, while it does come with money and it does come with votes, NRA represents a lot of resources, it also represents an ideological
so a certain mindset.
Endorsement. Yes.
Right.
And so you look for organizations who are trusted by people. So the New York Times endorsement, for example, the New York Times is trusted by the readers of the New York Times for the most part, and so their endorsement is meaningful to their opinion is meaningful to a large segment of the population.
So in a very simplistic way, you can almost look at somebody's endorsements and get a sense of where they are.
Yes.
On the scale of super conservative, super liberal, progressive.
And sometimes just on individual issues.
Right. But that's a way also of seeing, like maybe if somebody fits with what you think, depending on who has decided to jump on their bandwagon and endorse them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so into the next segment now about how the established players think about things as opposed to folks who are new. New people often don't have pre-existing relationships with incumbents. And they're sort of open to the idea that somebody new might run and come in and speak to their sensibilities in a way that an incumbent doesn't. However, folks who have been in politics for a while have a different view of it, which is they're looking for somebody that they can trust. And at the end of the day, so much of politics comes down to trust and who you think you can actually believe. And in some regards, this is something that speaks to the experience of people who are in the establishment. And mind you, I don't want to blanket all establishment players. There are plenty who lock out challengers because they're trying to preserve their own power. But certainly at the local level, Democratic club level in particular, at least in New York, even in reform organizations, you'll have people who side with the incumbent because they know the incumbent.
You stick with something that's familiar rather than go out on a limb and try something new.
Well, not just that they're familiar, but that there's a pre-existing relationship and folks have a record in that office, and beyond having a record, they have a record of listening to the established clubs and leadership. And so, as a club president, I know I can get the ear of a Congress member or a city council member or whatever it is, and a new person who knows who they're going to listen to, what they're going to do. If they haven't, and this is why clubs and local leaders heavily favor people who have been involved already. They have a track record of things for which they've fought for, and they have a track record of working with the people who are already involved.
I totally hear that, and I completely understand where that comes from. But
yes.
As one of the new people
yes.
who's leaning towards bringing new people into the system, the current guard doesn't always work.
That's right.
And even if you have an established relationship, and one person I heard speak, who was a very powerful speaker who was running for office and did not get the club endorsement in a close race, was that at this point in time, in this very messy, challenging political situation, it's not enough to be good. And it's not enough to sort of be in your progressive box, you gotta break the box and do something else. Because the status quo isn't working.
Yes.
And so I think that for a lot of people who are freaking out about what's going on in the country right now, shaking it up and changing things and bringing in people who aren't the establishment, because the establishment isn't really working right now. So I can see why there's a real meeting or clash
Yes.
of ideas, because something has to give. What we have right now doesn't work.
Right.
So can the same people suddenly pivot and change and make it work? Or will it take new blood? Or maybe the new blood is just going to be more throwing stuff against the wall that doesn't stick.
Right. Well, one thing I will say about new blood, which I generally, or not generally, which I definitely think is important and critical, and I'm a supporter of term limits, even in legislatures now, and I didn't used to be, but I am certainly now. But one of the issues with, it's not an issue with new blood, but the idea of like changing things just because it appears to be broken right now is, first, those who are involved or have been involved for a long time will say there's better places to direct that energy. So areas with Republican incumbents, we should be unseating all of them, and actually it's a lot easier as a challenger who's a Democrat to go in and challenge a Republican, and certainly vice versa for the Republicans, because there's no established
Right, so you're not challenging an
cohort.
established person within your party.
Exactly. But in addition to that, how confident are you that a person who has come out of the woodwork, or what have you, is going to stand by all the things that they've said? And this is another thing about trust. We say, oh, the establishment compromises, they're not as progressive as they should be, they're not as vocal as they should be. This might all be true. And in fact, in many cases, it is absolutely true.
I have to interrupt and say,
Yes.
I've learned from your workshops how even when people come in with the right ideas, look really motivated, they want to do things, sometimes it's just the structure and the leadership of who happens to be in charge
Yes.
that enables things to move forward. So it could be that the most wonderful, inspiring politician just gets stopped dead in their tracks because of party leadership from the opposition, because things don't get past committee. So it doesn't mean that they're not a great politician
Right.
themselves, it's that the circumstances surrounding them. So that's another layer that I think a lot of people don't understand. It's not that maybe your congressman or your senator or your governor isn't doing what you want, it's that sometimes they're just stuck in a
Right.
space where they can't.
And this would take us into a conversation about seniority and who actually has power in the
Yes,
legislature.
that's great.
And why you would switch up somebody with seniority for a new person when that new person will, by definition, right, have less power, have less seniority. And this is a whole other thing which establishment folks consider, but we're sort of at the end of our time. So I think we should talk about endorsements and the value of new versus old again.
I do too.
But for the moment, I want to just sort of summarize the points that we made this time, which is endorsements are things which clubs and other and influential individuals give to candidates to send resources towards them. And one of the ways in which people think about endorsements is with whom have they worked already and have an established relationship, because they're more likely to support those folks, whereas new people don't have those pre-existing
Right, and
relationships.
they can do whatever they want.
And they're much more open to the idea of somebody else who's also new
Right.
participating.
On that note, although it's not really on that note, but I want to bring up that you are going to be up for endorsements.
That's true.
And that you're going up for an election this year.
March 8th, Village Independent Democrats is endorsing for state committee. So if you want to see how an endorsement meeting works, please come out. I would appreciate your vote if you're a member of the club. But even if not, I'm sure it will be an interesting process to observe. Yep.
You know, my last endorsement meeting was my first one, and it
Yes.
was actually really interesting to just hear people competing for the same role,
Yep.
different points of views, the conversations, the questions that were asked. It was really, it was democracy in action
Yes.
at a very local level. But how important is that? This is where it all starts, and it's important and a great way to start getting involved.
Incredibly. And the last thing I'll say is that in my first run, when I ran for state committee, I would not have been able to succeed without the endorsement of the local clubs, because I would have had to gather petition signatures all by myself. And in receiving their endorsements, I received both resources for my campaign, but also a lot of petition signature gathering volunteers, which made my life
That's key.
significantly easier. So I made the ballot easily and had people who knew my name by the time the election rolled around. And so I go to the clubs to seek the endorsement, and I care a lot about what members of that club think and what they say. So the endorsement goes both ways. It's important for the politicians, but also it's important for you as active citizens who want to have a voice, because by having a vote on an endorsement,
you really have a voice.
That's right, politicians care what you think.
Yeah, and that's really true at a time where it feels like politicians don't. This is a real opportunity to be heard and to make a difference in who's going to be competing in primaries.
Yes, so we'll be discussing this topic in even more depth again, but for the moment, I think we've done a good job.
All right. See you soon.
Laters.